So, Sonic the Hedgehog was obviously quite the game changer when it was released in 1991, and it helped to course correct the Sega Genesis in North America and Europe. With Sonic turning heads and pushing units, it only made sense that Sega's Sonic team would build on the foundations of their first title and make a sequel. Sega actually developed two Sonic the Hedgehog 2s, one in Japan that would eventually become Sonic CD, which we're looking at next, and the other developed in the US for the Genesis by Sega Technical Institute. The latter was released in November of 1992 to significant critical and commercial success. If Sonic 1 hadn't sold people on a Genesis, then it was Sonic 2 that really pushed the system into the mainstream. Since its release, Sonic 2 has become one of the two classicest favorite installments in the Sonic series. Hell, one of my favorite YouTubers, The Great Clement, has labeled Sonic 2 his favorite game of all time. Some Call Me Johnny has called Sonic 2 his second favorite behind 3 and Knuckles. Clearly, a lot of Sonic fans out there must really get a kick out of this title. So, what do I think of Sonic the Hedgehog 2? And how does the iOS Android remake stack up with the Genesis original? Without further ado, this is Sonic the Hedgehog 2 for Sega Genesis. The plot is more or less the same as last time around. Dr. Ivo Eggman Robotnik has invaded peaceful West Island and kidnapped all of its animal inhabitants, using them as fuel sources to power his mechanical badniks. Robotnik is searching for the 7 Chaos Emeralds, so that he can power his ultimate creation, the Death Egg. What does this awe-inspiring space station do? Never explained. For all we know, it could just be a giant space disco ball and the good doctor just wants to bust a move. Sonic the Hedgehog and his buddy, Miles Tails Prower, set off to release their animal buddies from the badniks, collect all the Chaos Emeralds, defeat the scientist, and destroy the Death Egg. Again, it's nothing too complicated, but at least Sonic 2 tries to raise the stakes a little from last time around. When it comes to the characters introduced in this game, I must say that I really do adore Tails the Two-Tailed Fox. As far as his characterization goes, I much prefer smart inventor Tails to baby talk Tails from the classic series in Sonic Heroes. Seriously, his voice actor in that game was just awful, but his characterization doesn't really affect Sonic 2's plot all that much. He does have a number of different backstories depending on which game or show you're looking at, but the basic gist is that Tails was somewhat of a depressed and lonely guy until one day he met Sonic, who was confident, in your face, and full of personality. Tails chased after him, and the two became really close friends. Tails found a sense of self-confidence he didn't have before, and Sonic got a one-of-a-kind buddy that'd follow him anywhere. It's quite the touching backstory, but Tails doesn't just exist for the purpose of putting a cute baby fox on the cover of the game. By the way, I must say that I think the Japanese artwork for these games is a lot better, much like with Streets of Rage. Frankly, I think the American artwork for Sonic 2 is kind of fugly, especially Robotnik's hyper-realistic giant face. But I seriously digress. Tails is actually a fully playable character. He doesn't really have any unique abilities, he's basically a yellow Sonic. And if you're playing as Sonic and Tails, a buddy can join in and play as Tails, who gains the power of immortality to wreak havoc upon his enemies. It's something, I guess. Like the previous remake, you can also play as Knuckles the Echidna, who's unlocked right from the get-go. Them aesthetics are just as good, if not better, than Sonic 1's. The graphics and art direction are just as cartoony and colorful as last time around. But I do see an overall improvement in the sprite work and in the shading technique. And as for the soundtrack, in my opinion, it's even better than the first games. The overall instrument quality has increased. There's a lot less Genesis twang to the music than before. And there's also an interesting amount of genre variety. While Hilltop Zone has kind of a western feel going for it, Metropolis Zone has sort of a grungy techno beat. Every track, from the boss theme to the special stage theme to the many stage themes, is catchy and well composed. Absolutely no complaints. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 looks and sounds really nice. Yet gameplay is more or less the same as Sonic 1. Sonic controls exactly as before. He'll gradually accelerate after running long enough, and he retains his spin attack. Introduced in this game is Sonic's signature move, the spin dash. By pushing down on the controller and mashing the jump button, Sonic will rev up like an engine and then he will go zoom. So that means that unlike Sonic 1, you don't have to backtrack halfway across the stage to run around the loop-de-loops. Just let off a spin dash and you're golden. The spin dash is a great addition to Sonic's moveset, but I do have one nitpick. Why couldn't the spin dash have had its own button? The Genesis controller has 3 buttons on it, and instead of assigning the spin dash and the jump to 2 separate buttons, you have this counterintuitive button combination that first-time players won't think to try. And on top of that, you have to come to a complete stop to be able to use it at all. It can be kind of a pace breaker, honestly. You're struggling to get up a hill or something, and you just want to tap a button and get a burst of speed. But instead you have to slowly bring Sonic to a stop, press down, mash the button, and then finally activate the spin dash. I prefer the way the spin dash was handled in Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, Sonic Lost World, and Sonic Generations, precisely because you can activate it with the push of a button while running. Regardless, it's something I'm willing to get over for the sake of enjoying this game. Not a huge deal, just not the design choice I would have made. Ironically, in the case of the mobile remake, I think the single button control scheme actually helps the experience more than it hinders it. The problem with touch controls in mobile action games is that without having the feel of a physical button under your finger, juggling your thumb between 2 or 3 buttons feels awkward and unnatural. So for everything to use a single button in the mobile version of Sonic 2 feels more comfortable than it would otherwise. It still annoys me that I can't spin dash on the fly, but if it improves the overall comfort of the touch control scheme, then I'm all for it. On to the locales. Sonic 2 has 11 zones, usually containing 2 acts each, at the end of which lies a face-off with the good doctor and one of his many killbots. The bosses are all pretty creative and fun to fight, by the way, with one glaring exception. While 2 acts may sound kind of short, Sonic 2 compensates by offering levels that are considerably larger than those of the first game. Because of this, Sonic 2 is a marginally longer game than the first. If you're playing the remake, you also have access to an exclusive level, Hidden Palace Zone, which you can enter by jumping into the infamous Pit and Mystic Cave Zone. Hidden Palace was originally dummied out of the Genesis version due to time constraints, but Taxman and Stealth were able to finish the original level and even throw in a new boss fight to boot. It's a pretty cool addition. As far as the layout of these levels is concerned, they were definitely designed around Sonic's speed ability much more so than the first game. There are more loop-de-loops, more curved hills, more springs, more long stretches of slopes or pipes that exist just to give the player a fleeting sense of speed, and more speed boosters. Additionally, while Sonic had a special speed cap in the first game, this has been removed to allow the blue blur to accelerate to ridiculous degrees. While it's nice that the level design complements Sonic's abilities more so than before, it also introduces the overarching problem that Sonic would face going forward. How can we make Sonic fast while still giving the player a satisfying and complete degree of control? Personally, I think Sonic 1 handled this pretty well. While there were plenty of opportunities for the player to go fast and feel speedy, the speed cap in the level design prevented Sonic from going so fast that he'd run into enemies or stage hazards, most of the time. Sonic 2, in my opinion, doesn't handle this balance of control and speed as well as its predecessor. The spin dash, while great for getting yourself up to speed from a standstill, often sends you careening into spikes or enemies. This is exacerbated by the camera system. In most classic platforming games, like Super Mario or Donkey Kong Country, the camera tilts forward a little bit when you run, helping you to see what's ahead. But classic Sonic feels the need to keep Sonic in the dead center of the screen at all times. This leads Sonic to crash into enemies and stage hazards more often than you'd like. And though the ring system alleviates this problem by giving you virtually unlimited hits, it is admittedly somewhat annoying that the visibility couldn't be better. While this was kind of a problem in Sonic 1, the game's speed cap and level design restricted Sonic's movement enough so you could see where you were going. It's for this basic reason that I enjoy the best of 3D Sonic over the best of 2D Sonic. In a 3D game, I can always see where I'm going, and even in 2D sections, the camera will zoom out so you can see what you're doing. Again, Sonic 2 is very much playable. All I'm saying is that Sonic can tend to slam into stuff when you're running at high speeds, which leads the player to take things at a slower pace than would be ideal. Nothing game-breaking, just kind of annoying. The remake alleviates this problem by a substantial margin. Like the Sonic 1 remake, it renders in 1080p at 60 FPS with a non-stretch widescreen aspect ratio. In addition to improving the overall aesthetic quality of an already great looking game, the 16:9 image greatly improves the player's visibility, allowing you to better avoid enemies and stage hazards that would have been harder to avoid in the original. Another thing worth mentioning about the levels is, again, the more non-linear design. I saved this topic of discussion for the Sonic 2 review partially because the Sonic 1 review was getting too long, but also because Sonic 2 was where the series really started to emphasize non-linear level design and branching pathways. A lot of Sonic fans act as though this is inherently a good thing, something that makes 2D Sonic a better experience than the 3D titles, or something like Mario. As for me, I think linear level design gets an undeservedly bad reputation. Linear level design allows the game designers to make an unforgettable experience that is nuanced and complete. You're in for the same experience every time you play the game, yes, but if it's a polished and interesting experience, then does that really matter? It's for that reason that I prefer Mario to Sonic. I prefer polished and complete levels to something complicated just for the sake of being complicated. And don't take that to mean that I dislike exploratory level design, on the contrary. I've stated numerous times before that I enjoy hunting for star coins in Mario, bonus rooms and puzzle pieces in Donkey Kong Country, and yes, red star rings in the modern era Sonic games. While you have to go through a set pathway to reach the end, these hidden collectibles give the player an incentive to explore the level design all the way, and reward completionists with extra content and unlockables. With such elements included in the level design, it keeps the level feeling simple and complete, while also containing small nuances and secondary goals to keep the player interested in what they're playing. I felt that Sonic 1 did this quite well. Figuring out which way to go and how to progress was relatively simple. The multiple pathways were clearly split and kept separate, such that it was almost a combination of multiple linear levels in one single level. Sonic 2 is a bit of a different story. Many of them feel on par with Sonic 1, not getting too crazy and remaining relatively straightforward and comfortable to play. Others, like Aquatic Ruin Zone, are utter clusterfucks, twisting and winding around each other in a way that's not easy to tell where a single pathway starts and ends. It's just awkward and clumsy. I imagine that most classic Sonic fans don't really mind this all that much, and see it as a welcome break from level design convention. And if that's what they like, more power to them. As for me, I'm more ambivalent. While the levels in Sonic 2 are still pretty fun to plow through, all things considered, the convolution and awkward level structure of stages like Aquatic Ruin Zone give this subtle sense that the level designers didn't have a whole lot of intentionality in where they placed enemies, stage hazards, set pieces, and power-ups. I want to make it clear that I do not think that Sonic 2 has bad level design. What I am saying is that it feels Sonic 2's level design has a little too much going on sometimes, and that the levels in Sonic 1 are more finished, nuanced, and complete. Again, that's coming from someone who prefers linear level design in his platformers, so take that all with a grain of salt. Time to move on to the difficulty. So remember how in my last review I mentioned that I will never forget what I went through to finish that game for the first time? Well, what I went through with the first game is absolutely nothing compared to Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Why is that? Well, for one thing, there are still limited continues. At this point, Super Mario World was out, and that game had a save feature. There is absolutely no reason whatsoever why Sonic the Hedgehog 2 could not have had so much as a password system. As I said last time, limited continues in and of themselves are not terrible. If a game is specially designed to complement that design philosophy, then I don't mind it. And to some extent, Sonic 2 does balance things out with the ring system and the multitude of chances for the player to nab extra guys or earn continues. But because the ring system gives you virtually unlimited hits against enemies, most of the time you're gonna die because of unforeseeable instant kill bullshit. Sonic 1 had its share of this instant kill nonsense too, and I singled it out as my greatest complaint of an overall well-designed and fun platforming game. When it comes to Sonic 2, on the other hand, it seems like classic Sonic Team felt that the first game was too easy. So they decided to make the sequel arbitrarily harder by putting in more underwater sections, more giant moving stage hazards that can crush you out of nowhere, more bottomless pits that are hard to predict, more spikes every fucking where, and committing some of the worst enemy placement I have ever seen in a video game. Looks like there's some kind of passage down there. Let's check it out. What? That's a pit? There aren't any other pits in this level, so why is that one there? Oh, what the shit? How the bloody fuck was I supposed to know that was gonna happen? Take that, fucknick. I beat it, I did it, I won. Son of a fucking bitch. Oh, nice. Good one, classic Sonic team, good one. You know, people always bitch about Labyrinth Zone in Sonic 1. You wanna know what's much worse? Metropolis Zone. This zone has a million different stage hazards, goes on for 3 tedious acts, and contains some of the most obnoxious badniks in Sonic history. And good luck holding onto your rings because the enemy placement is absolute horseshit. Oh boy, that Mantis badnik is gonna knock me off, isn't he? Yup, and now I have to backtrack halfway across the level just so I can get the damn platform to respawn so I can move on. How the bloody hell am I supposed to get past that? You can't land on the platform without him hitting you. The Sonic team of the classic era seems to understand difficulty as the art of surprising the player with bullshit they couldn't possibly predict, and then punishing players for not knowing any better by forcing them to start over from the beginning of the game if they die an arbitrary number of times. To be perfectly frank, that's not my idea of a fun challenge. After you've played through the game enough times, like all the 25 to 35-year-old classicists who have been playing this game for the past 22 years, you've memorized where all the instant kill hazards are, so you know how to properly avoid them by taking specific routes around them. But if you're a newcomer to Classic Sonic who's playing it 20-some years after its original release date, like I was, then beating Sonic 2 for the first time is hell. This would be more acceptable if the game was short, but it's pretty frickin' long. Something like Contra can be beaten in about half an hour, and for that reason the limited continues are a lot more acceptable there. Now, so many people got bent out of shape about 2013's Sonic Lost World, citing levels like Lava Mountain Zone Act 2 as examples of horrible difficulty balancing, and unwelcome additions of trial and error gameplay, which they say doesn't belong in a Sonic game. I would agree that this level is pretty damn frustrating on your first playthrough, but someone needs to explain to me why instant kill bomb carts in one level toward the end of a game with unlimited continues and a save feature is too much trial and error, but slamming into enemies and stage hazards you can hardly see coming, glitching through the floor into a bottomless pit, getting crushed by elevators you can't see, or falling into bottomless pits that you can't predict is perfectly acceptable in a game where dying too many times means you not only have to redo the 3-minute long level you were playing, but the entire game. If you're gonna bitch about the difficulty balancing in Sonic Lost World, then I'd like you to remember that your precious classics didn't have the greatest difficulty balancing either. And then there's the special stages. I made no secret in the last review that I considered it the weakest part of Sonic 1, especially seeing as the reward for getting the Chaos Emeralds was pretty much worthless. So, are the special stages in Sonic 2 any better than the first games? Once again, I want to stress that the special stages are optional. If you don't want to do them, you don't have to. So no matter what I feel about the special stages, it doesn't affect my overall opinion of Sonic 2. And in some aspects, the special stage system is an improvement over Sonic 1. Unlike before, where there were only 10 chances to enter a special stage to get 6 total emeralds, Sonic 2 allows you to enter the special stages simply by activating a checkpoint and jumping into the sparkly ring that appears over the post. Seeing as there are about 3 checkpoints per stage and approximately 20-some levels in the whole game, the sequel is certainly more generous than Sonic 1 when it comes to chances. But by replacing the special rings with the checkpoints, Sonic 2 introduces a whole new slew of problems to the special stage system that I think makes it even worse. First of all, finding the checkpoints is a goddamn task to itself, considering the overly complicated level design. You'd think they'd be found at regular intervals in a given pathway, but their placement feels completely erratic. You can either wanker around like a jackass trying to find them, or you can cheat and look them up online. There may have been only 10 special rings in Sonic 1, but at least finding them wasn't an issue. On top of finding the checkpoints, you've got to collect 50 rings in order to open the special stage at all. So that means that even if you somehow manage to stumble across a checkpoint, you're probably not going to have enough rings to be able to get in, because an enemy more likely than not flew on screen out of nowhere 5 seconds ago, and now you have to spend 2 more minutes trying to find 50 more rings, and praying to Hylia all the while that you can somehow manage to find your way back to the checkpoint without losing them all over again. Can you see why the visibility problem I mentioned earlier could be kind of problematic? Because enemies fly on screen or burst out of walls with little warning, it's hard to predict when something's gonna rob you of your chances of getting into a special stage. Because you're being especially careful not to get hit by shit, Sonic 2 goes from being a relatively fast-paced and fun game to an incredibly slow-paced one where there's an exceptionally small margin for error. If you don't quite know what you're doing, a single act can take upwards of 15 minutes. And even if you do somehow manage to get 50 rings and find your way to a checkpoint, whatever you do, don't walk off screen. If the checkpoint gets even a pixel out of bounds, the sparkly ring will disappear and you'll have screwed yourself out of a chance of getting into the special stages. Trust me, it sounds like it wouldn't be that bad, but it'll fuck you over more often than you'd think. Assuming you can actually do all that shit, you'll arrive in a special stage, which depicts Sonic and Tails running down a pre-rendered CG corridor, collecting rings, avoiding spikes, and passing special gates. And the stage design is absolute balls. If Sonic fails to collect a specific amount of rings by the time he reaches a gate, you lose and get kicked out of the stage with no option to try again. And there is absolutely no leniency. There is just barely enough rings, and if you get hit more than twice, you're boned. And because the stages are pre-rendered, it's hard to see what's coming soon enough to prepare for it. So you'll be walking down the hallway when it suddenly lurches upward, and a fucking ball spike pops up out of nowhere, and you only get half of a second to jump over the sodding thing. Or maybe you're rounding a corner, and because you're trying desperately to avoid getting hit by another surprise ball spike, you jump prematurely, only to miss a huge important pocket of rings that you sorely needed to get through that next gate. It's impossible to know where the rings and ball spikes are going to be unless if you memorize every single solitary part of all 7 of these special stages. And highly I help you if you bring Tails along. Not only does that raise the number of rings you need to pass through the gates, but his AI is broken as all fuck. He copies your movements about 3 seconds after you do them, so you gotta jump over ball spikes 3 seconds in advance. Because stuff just sort of flies on screen without warning, Tails is going to constantly slam into shit and lose your hard-earned rings. A second player can control Tails, but that doesn't really help things that much. They have to memorize the stage layout too. You can choose to play the game as just Sonic, but that doesn't change the fact that these special stages have some truly god-awful and obnoxious design. And believe you me, there is nothing worse than finally making it to the end of the stage only to discover that you're 1 or 2 rings short, to which the Emerald replies by lazily floating away. What's preventing Sonic from running faster and grabbing the Emerald? At least in Sonic 1, losing clearly ejected you from the stage. Here the game just sort of says, you lose, I guess.
Oh my god, start spinning, spin.
Oh my god. We're gonna get like 209. No! I fucking knew it! And when you lose the stage, you lose all of your rings. And most of the time, there aren't any rings next to the checkpoints. And if there's an enemy or a boss next to the checkpoint, fuck! You'd think that in a game or getting a game over means you have to start from the beginning. That classic Sonic team would have made the design of these stages a little more forgiving, but no. The only way you will beat these things is with a tremendous amount of memorization and trial and error. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind. The special stages in Sonic 2 are by far and unquestionably the worst special stages in the entire classic series. There is absolutely no fun or enjoyment to be had here whatsoever. The Sonic 1 special stages weren't that much fun either, but at least they were structured in a way that kept the game moving. It didn't force the player to spend 15 minutes wankering around a given stage looking for a checkpoint. If by some miracle you can actually get all 7 emeralds in one playthrough without getting a game over, then you unlock Super Sonic. But frankly, that's a big ol' if, because unless if you're a Sonic 2 god, you have absolutely no chance in hell of getting him at all. My brother and I were able to do it once, after using up every continue we had in the last few zones of the game to respawn the checkpoints, and while Super Sonic is really cool if you can actually get him, the tedium and frustration you have to go through to unlock him is just not worth it. You don't even unlock Super Sonic permanently. The moment you hit the power button on your Genesis, you have to get the Chaos Emeralds all over again. And as for the ending you get, I agree with Johnny on this one. It's actually not as good as the bad ending. And then there's the end game.
Ah, spoiler alert!
So, by some miracle, the first-time player makes it through the 2-hour-long hike to the final zones of the game. Sonic follows the Doctor onto his airship, Wing Fortress Zone. The first time I got to this level, I had just beat Metropolis Zone by the skin of my teeth, 1 life left. I dodged all the spinning fan blades, I made it over the bottomless pits. It was the farthest I had ever gotten. And then, this happened. I was fucking livid. 2 hours of my life down the drain. And all because I didn't know I was supposed to let go of the right button when going off this launcher thing. How would anybody think to do that? I was so pissed that I put this game down for over a year. When I sat down to play it again, I was hell-bent on finishing it. I built up a stockpile of lives and continues, I made it to Wing Fortress, and I got on board the Death Egg. It's time to show this game who's boss. Let's finish the... Where are the rings? Where are the damn rings? No, they must have put them over here, right? After all the trouble I went through to get this far, they wouldn't be so sadistic as to throw me into the final boss battle without any rings. Right? 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 Oh, brilliant. Lovely design on this boss. You gotta, like, jump into the side of his face. That's not frustrating or awkward at all. And down he goes. Wait, there's more? Hey, Robotnik can run faster than Sonic. That's cool. Wait, what's that? Oh, shit. Alright, I've got to be able to kill him. Jump into the... What?! How did I die? Did I get killed by the spikes on his hand? How can I die from something that's in the foreground? And the spikes are directly in front of his chest where his weak point is, making it near impossible to attack him without killing yourself. And even if you do somehow manage to damage him, he takes like 12 hits. And if you die on the Death Egg robot boss, you gotta fight Silver Sonic again. The first time I reached this boss, I got a game over. The second time I reached this boss, I got a game over. The third time I reached this boss, I got a game over. I was so hell-bent on beating this game that I finished 4 full playthroughs back to back, each ending in a game over, simply because I just did not know how you were supposed to beat this boss. And I do object to the fact that there are no rings. You can't force the player to become reliant on rings for 2 hours and then suddenly take them away just for the sake of making the game arbitrarily harder to beat. To all those people in the comments saying, oh, it's the final boss, it's supposed to be hard, I just roll my eyes. Just because it's hard does not justify the bad game design. There are ways they could have made this boss hard and still give the player rings. I mean, tell me truthfully and honestly, is there really any good reason whatsoever why there could not have been a single ring? And yes, I am aware that the final boss in Sonic 1 didn't have rings either, but that was only one boss, and defeating it was relatively straightforward and easy to figure out. The Death Egg robot, on the other hand, is a different story. How was I supposed to know, my first time playing, that you're supposed to get him to drop down for the ceiling and bend over, jump into his chest, run to the other side of the room, and rinse and repeat for what feels like 20 goddamn minutes? I'm sure that there's someone out there saying, when you know what to do, it's really not that bad. And yes, there is some truth to that. Since my first playthrough, I've adjusted to the Death Egg robot's crap factor, and I can consistently beat him on my first try. But that doesn't mean my first playthrough wasn't frustrating as all hell. And besides, most Sonic fans don't seem content to let the "it's not that bad if you know what to do" logic apply to the Zavok fight in Sonic Lost World. Yeah, that's another Sonic boss where defeating it is confusing and frustrating. When you know what to do, he's really easy. If you don't, he's pretty much unbeatable. And many Sonic fans, including yours truly, felt that the Zavok fight was frustrating and annoying to play for precisely that reason. So, why is it that we're perfectly content to bash the Zavok fight for being confusing and frustrating to play, but the Death Egg robot fight is perfectly fine? I mean, at least the Zavok fight had rings, and at least it was a lot shorter and more interesting. At least getting a game over didn't mean replaying the entire game. You can't heavily scrutinize one game just because it's new, but then completely excuse another game for doing the exact same thing except arguably worse just because it's old. That's not how it works. While I still think that Dark Gaia is a worse final boss fight than the Death Egg robot, I'd still rather fight Solaris. I'd still rather fight the Time Eater. After getting a game over on this asshole for the 4th time, I looked it up online. I just wanted to be done. And on my 5th full playthrough, I finally landed a 12th hit on the Death Egg robot and watched him crumple to pieces at my feet. The Death Egg blew up, Tails rescued Sonic on his airplane, and the Doctor's plans of world domination were finally destroyed. As the credits rolled, I felt a strange mixture of pride and frustration. It was a hollow victory, but I could now say that I had beaten Sonic 2. Obviously, I don't have an especially high opinion of Sonic 2's difficulty balancing, special stage system, or the final bosses, and that's what really sells the Android iOS remake as the better version for me. Like the Sonic 1 remake, the mobile version of Sonic 2 includes 4 save files that autosave by act with all your emeralds, meaning that getting a game over because of an unforeseeable crush death or the horseshit final boss doesn't mean having to redo the entire game. And if you're not picky like me, and you felt the original was fine the way it was, there's also a no save mode that's just like the original. The special stages still suffer from poor stage design, but because they're rendered in full 3D in real time at 60 FPS, the visibility is much improved. and you're given more time to react to ball spikes and whatnot. And like the previous remake, you're given a stage select upon beating the game, giving you the ability to revisit Emerald Hill over and over until you get all 7 emeralds. And once you've unlocked Supersonic for that file, he's there until you erase it. While these additions may seem trivial and unneeded to those who love the original, in my opinion, these are major additions that drastically improve the game's accessibility for newer players and strengthen the game's overall enjoyability. So, remake or rebreak. What's the verdict? The Taxman and Stealth version of Sonic 2 is an easy replace. The definitive Sonic the Hedgehog 2 experience. In addition to faithfully recreating all the things that were great about the original, namely the graphics, the music, the 3-player characters, and the overall level design, it fixes everything that was not so great and adds a brand new level to boot. The save feature removes the problems with the difficulty balancing and makes the experience more accessible as well as enjoyable for newcomers and veterans alike. The graphics have been remastered in 1080p HD at 60 FPS, not only making the game even more aesthetically pleasing than before, but also improving the player's visibility and sense of control. While I still hate the special stages with a burning passion, the save feature removes game overs from the equation and allows you to unlock Supersonic once and keep him forever. And on top of all of this is a time trial mode, achievements, leaderboards, and the inclusion of a fully playable hidden palace zone. The result is an exceptionally nuanced and polished 2D platforming experience that I would recommend to absolutely anyone with an iPhone or Android and $3 to spare. The Taxman and Stealth remake, in providing a revamped and definitive Sonic the Hedgehog 2 experience, takes a game I've always been pretty ambivalent about and turns it into something I truly and wholeheartedly enjoy. And that segues into my final discussion of Sonic 2 as a game. In his review of Sonic Lost World, Some Call Me Johnny said that he will never forget the misery that was his first playthrough of Sonic Lost World, and that though the game grew on him in a second playthrough, he quips that if your first experience of a video game is very hit and miss to begin with, what exactly compels you to go back and try again? I could say the exact same thing about my experiences with the Genesis version of Sonic the Hedgehog 2. The 2 years it took me to finish Sonic 2 for the first time was truly one of the most frustrating experiences I have ever had with a video game, and that experience has left me with a mixed reception of Sonic 2 in general. My overall opinion of this game has improved with repeated playthroughs and a greater accumulation of skill with the classic Sonic formula. And there are certain aspects that I've always liked. The music, graphics, and art direction are great. Most of the bosses are a lot of fun to fight. The levels are generally enjoyable to plow through. And frankly, if you're just playing through Sonic 2 like normal, ignoring all the special stages and brushing it off when you slam into an enemy and lose your rings, this game can be really fun and worthwhile. But then there are the things that I have never liked. The special stages, though technically optional, are by far the worst of the classic series. Though the level design is good overall, a handful of the zones don't seem as well thought out and designed as those of the previous game. While the levels emphasize Sonic's speed more so than Sonic 1, this comes at the cost of less control. And though the game remains perfectly playable throughout, Sonic 1 is the overall smoother experience when it comes to control and progression. Additionally, the enemy placement can be really fucking obnoxious, and there are spikes everywhere. The final boss is frustrating as all hell, and the game's difficulty balancing is tremendously flawed, due to the game's sheer overabundance of instant kill deaths that more or less require a bothersome level of trial and error to conceivably avoid. For these reasons, I consider Sonic the Hedgehog 1 to be a better designed, smoother, and more enjoyable gaming experience than Sonic the Hedgehog 2. I'm sure that a lot of people want to nail me to a cross for saying that, but that's my opinion and I stand by it. I want to make it perfectly clear that I don't consider Sonic the Hedgehog 2 to be a bad game. I just find the frustration factor to be a little strong for my taste, so I find my personal preference leaning elsewhere. You don't have to agree with my opinion, you don't have to like it, but that's how I feel. While I do consider the Android iOS remake to be vastly more enjoyable than the Genesis original, I still find the Android iOS version of Sonic 1 to have a slight edge in terms of level design and speed balancing. The difference is smaller, and I still like both remakes quite a bit, but if I had to pick my favorite of the two, my vote still goes to Sonic 1. Obviously, I would not personally agree that Sonic 2 is the best game in the series, but at the same time, I don't begrudge those who do. If you can and really do enjoy the Genesis version of Sonic 2 despite its flaws, then know that I respect your opinion. To those Dreamcastians or modernists that want to get into classic Sonic and see what everyone is so excited about, I recommend saving Sonic 2 for when your classic Sonic skill set is developed and ready. And who knows, maybe you'll have more fun with it than I had my first time through. Provided that I haven't scared you all off, next time we'll be looking at Sonic the Hedgehog CD for the Sega CD, as well as its mobile remake for iOS, Android, and Windows Phone. Until then, I'm ExoParadigmGamer, and I hope you got something out of this review.